afternoon, everyone. Hope you had a great morning and a great lunch and a great practice. Um, Thanks, Bhante, for leading the retreat today. And hello, Kevin, Kat, Andy, Jerry, Ryan, Ella, Jens, Peter, and Julia. And Kevin says, focusing on earth element during lunch definitely made the food less appetizing. I can see how that practice could bolster Renan. And we have also Gleam Tech and Sally joining us.
Yes, Kevin, that's correct. So my preceptor, when asked if he does Asubha meditation, his answer was no. But he said that practicing the 6 elements, he found has a similar effect for reducing the tendency of the mind towards sensual desire. So all forms of sensuality, actually, not just craving for food. Also, when we practice the 6 elements, it tends to cool down and settle the mind. Like when we see all things as just being composed of these elements, all of which are impersonal functions of nature, then something about that recognition tends to lead to the diminishing of all forms of sensual craving. But yeah, particularly the contemplation around the nature of food, it changes the way we relate to food. And this is true of all the Buddhist practices related to food. They're about reminding us of what food really is. It's about reminding us about its function, so that we don't get so wrapped up in it. We don't get so obsessed with textures and tastes, but rather we pay attention to the purpose of food, which is to keep us alive and healthy so that we can continue practicing. In other words, because this body is constantly losing bits of earth element, we have to periodically put some new earth element into it, or else the whole thing will waste away and not be of much use to us. So coming to our topic again, so our topic for this weekend, once again, is using the 6 elements as a lens for cultivating the recognition of not self. So this morning, I particularly emphasized the practice of focusing on the earth element as a starting point. And the earth element is particularly helpful in that it's solid, and we tend to relate to the outside world primarily in terms of solid objects. So we think of this body sitting on this cushion on this floor in front of this altar. We think of this spoon lifting up a spoonful of mushrooms from the bowl on the table. Like it's all relating to the world in terms of solid objects interacting with each other. And all of that is simply earth element. It's just earth element. There's nothing there which can be described in other terms. But the next major thing that we interact with is liquids. So for example, right in front of me right now, Ayasoma is drinking a cup of tea in flagrant violation of the no food and drink in the Dharma Hall rule. Nonetheless, it serves as a good example of this next element. So similarly to how we periodically put earth element into the body and periodically expel earth element from the body, usually we do, well, not always, it depends on your physical condition, but many people do both of these activities every day. Some people less often or more often, depending on their conditions. Similarly with the water element. Most of us put water element into our body several times a day, and we also expel water element from the body several times a day. And actually, in the process of going through the day, we're constantly sweating. Even when it's not hot, your body is always leaking a certain amount of fluid through your skin. And we're also constantly absorbing a certain amount of humidity from the air, unless you live somewhere with 0% humidity, which I've lived in extremely dry climates for much of my life. So I know what it's like to live somewhere where the air is, in fact, completely dry. But most of the world, there's some amount of humidity in the air. So our body is constantly absorbing moisture from the air, and also it's constantly giving off moisture into the air. This is the nature of the body. So this is one of the values of reflecting on the water element, in that with the water element, the inseparability of the body and the outside world becomes a little more apparent. So with the earth element, it's a little bit easier to fall into the idea that this body is one solid chunk of earth element, which is completely separate from all the other chunks of earth element around it. But with the water element, that's actually not the case, because the air around us is saturated with water element. It's saturated with moisture. And our body is constantly absorbing moisture from the air and constantly giving off moisture into the air. So through sweating, through vapor, the body is constantly giving off moisture. So in this way, we can start to get this felt experience of the body as being completely inseparable from the rest of the world, of there not being any clear boundary between the water element inside the body and the water element outside the body. And this helps us to see clearly, to feel clearly, the arbitrary absurdity of saying that this water element is me and that water element is not me. It makes it much easier to see that it's all just water element. It's not me, it's not mine, it's just water. It's just a function of the natural world. And once again, since we're dealing with broad categories of experience rather than tables of chemistry formulas, when we talk about water element, we don't just mean H2O. We mean anything which is liquid, anything which has that quality of being fluid, of being wet, of being flowing. So this also includes oils. So some of us accumulate a lot of oil on our scalp. So your body is giving off oil through your skin. And so that's another way that we experience the water element, is the experience of oil. We also experience it in things which are viscous. So honey, for example, honey is something which is, it's more water element than earth element, unless you have solidified honey. But it's more watery, it's more liquid. So our experience of it when we relate to honey tends to be more on the liquid side. But that's also something which shows you that the same physical thing can be classified either as earth element or as water element, depending on the conditions. For example, actually H2O, when it gets cold enough, it becomes ice. So ice, we would relate to more in terms of the earth element, the experience of solidity and hardness, rather than the experience of fluidity and wetness. So this again is emphasizing the point that the six elements are not talking about absolute qualities of objects or absolute qualities of things, but rather about our experiences of how we relate to those things. So do you relate to honey as liquid or solid? Do you relate to it as water element or earth element? Well, that depends. Depends upon conditions. Do you relate to water itself as water element or as earth element? Well, that depends on how cold it is. So a simple change in condition will change how we relate to an aspect of the natural world, whether we relate to it as one element or another. So again, coming to the water element, we're relating to the experience of moisture, the experience of fluidity, of liquidity. So I'd like to go directly into guided meditation at this point. So we'll go ahead and do some meditation practice, and I'll walk you through a bit more practice with working with the elements. So please go ahead and get in your meditation posture. Taking a few deep breaths to settle the body and the mind. Bringing your attention to the body. Focusing on the experience of moisture. So you can feel the saliva in your mouth. You can feel the tears in your eyes. You can feel the blood rushing through your veins. You can feel the fluid in your stomach. You can feel the sweat on your skin, especially where your hands touch in your lap. You can feel the moisture on the skin. So you can feel the moisture saturating the whole body, inside and out. The entire body is wet. All your muscles and sinews and tendons, all your organs, all your veins, every single part of the body is wet. The whole body is saturated with moisture, saturated with fluids. Just focusing on the feeling of moisture all through the body, as though the body was a dense cloud of fog. Or a container of circulating liquid, like a waterfall. Just feeling the moisture all through the body. Just focusing on the water element of the body, the experience of liquid, fluidity, flowing, moistness, feeling the wetness of the body. Feeling the water element in the body, and feeling the moisture in the air around the body, the subtle dampness of humidity. Recognizing that the water element in the body is the same as the water element in the water vapor in the air. It's the same as the water in the clouds above falling down as rain. It's the same as the water flowing through the rivers and the streams and the oceans. It's the same as the water element throughout the entire universe. So the water element inside this body constantly leaking out, flowing out through the pores, through the orifices in the body. And the body is constantly absorbing moisture from the air, taking in moisture through the mouth and nose. So it's all just the same water element, inside, outside, no difference. Outside, the water element is not me. Inside, the water element is not me. It's all just the same water element. Not me, not mine, just a nature, just an aspect of the natural world. Moist, liquid, fluid, not me, not mine, just nature. Keep seeing the water element in this way. No inside, no outside, just water element. No me, no mine, just an aspect of nature, shifting and flowing, changing shape and form, coming and going in its own way. So at this point, I'd like to see if there's any questions or any clarification or any reflections on how this practice is going for people. And so we'll take a few minutes to address anything that's coming up, and then we'll do another short period of meditation on the fire element. So before we move on to the fire element, I'd like to see if there's any questions or comments so far.
Thank you, Bhante. And hello, Suzanne and Reed and Trina, Melinda, who um, have joined us in the meanwhile. Kevin says, ha ha ha, Aya's rock roots related to my drinking in the Dharma hall. And Reed is Aya lawbreaker. Yay!
You've got a nickname. Maybe Aya Scofflaw.
Well, monks are punks, especially if they come from Italy. And Sally says, later for Q&A, question 1. Can I feel the softness of the body and materials rather than hardness? My body usually get intense and not relaxed. Aware the softness helps feel the comfortable and ease quality.
Yeah, so the important thing with the earth element is to pay attention to the experience of solid matter. So focusing on hardness is a very direct way of getting in touch with that experience of solidity. But softness, focusing on softness can have a similar effect. So we're looking at results. If focusing on softness helps you get a direct felt experience of the earth element, so that then you can practice the recognition of not self, then that's okay. No problem.
And Reed said, how cold it is and how hard you belly flop onto it. Hehe. I think it was referred to something that you said earlier. But I don't remember. And Ryan had to leave as he's part of his state's coronavirus response and is being called away to work. But he's very grateful for the teachings. Sadhu, 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 Ryan, for doing what you're doing. So there are no questions right now, but they might appear shortly. So maybe we can give people a few seconds to. Oh, there you go. Peter is saying sensing external body liquids was easy, mouth, nose, etc. But sensing internal liquid was less clear. Feeling the pulse, I could imagine the liquid, but not touch the liquid. Any guidance?
Yeah, so this is one of the major obstacles that many people encounter in doing any kind of internal body meditation, which is that most people have built up a very strong habit of not feeling the inside of their body. But actually, we have the full ability to feel the inside of our body. We just usually don't pay attention to those sensations. So an example of this is when you have an upset stomach. When you have an upset stomach, then suddenly you're incredibly aware of the sensations of your stomach, of the inside of your abdomen, aware of the stomach fluids, which are circulating like a little hurricane inside your belly. Suddenly you're fully aware of all of that. Another example of this was, I remember a few years ago, I was eating something and I swallowed it, and I was breathing in while swallowing, which by the way is not a great idea, because since my airways were open, then the thing I was swallowing went into my lung. So I actually I was suddenly very sharply aware of what the little tube that connects your throat to your lung feels like from the inside. I was able to cough it out, but Ayasoma's making faces of disgust. So this is one of those things which you're supposed to be careful about, which is not inhaling while swallowing food. Because if you inhale while swallowing food, things can get down the wrong pipe and it's not very pleasant. But the point was, I realized in that moment that I was perfectly aware of the sensations in my lungs. It's just that most of the time I didn't pay any attention to it because most of the time I had no reason to pay attention to it. But actually, the sensations are always there. So it's important to start to develop an awareness of the inside of our body, of the sensations inside our body. So you can feel the fluids inside your body. You're just not used to, because you don't usually do that. It's not a habit that you have. Instead, like most people, you probably have a habit of ignoring your internal sensations. So the sensations inside the mouth and the nose and the eyes, those we tend to be fairly aware of. Those are usually the easiest places to start to feel water element inside the body. Also going down your throat, we're usually pretty aware of at least the upper part of the throat. And some people are also fairly aware of their stomach, fairly aware of the experience of stomach fluid. Especially if, like me, you've had chronic stomach problems for most of your life. I'm very aware of my stomach fluids pretty much all the time. But I've come to realize that many people are not aware of their stomach fluids because they don't have any reason to be, unless they're quite sick. But as we start to develop awareness of the inside of the body, we start to realize that actually we can feel everything in there if we turn our attention towards it. So yes, you can actually feel the blood in your veins. Not just the pulse. The pulse is actually a vibration through the earth element. So that's not the water element. That's vibration in the earth element, which is fine. I mean, that's a way that you can be aware of your body, but it's not actually the water element as far as I can tell. So water element is the actual feeling of liquid flowing through your veins. And yes, you can be aware of that. It's a little more subtle than the feeling of fluid in your stomach, and it's a lot more subtle than saliva in your mouth, but it is there. It is tangible. You can feel it. So try to develop that subtle, precise awareness of the inside of your body. It makes life a little more interesting, and it's great for your meditation practice. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. So we have quite a few questions that have popped out in the meanwhile. So Melvin is asking, is there any use for hand mudras in this practice? Like say the water mudra during water meditation, earth mudra during that meditation, or are hand mudras extra or ornamental?
So I mostly practice two forms of Buddhism. So Theravada Buddhism, which doesn't place any importance on mudras at all, and Chan Buddhism, which only uses one mudra for everything. So I'm not the best person to consult about the use of mudras, but from the Theravada perspective, what I can say is anything which reminds you of what you're supposed to be doing is good for your meditation. So if putting your hands in the water mudra, and I don't even know what the water mudra looks like, but if you know what the water mudra looks like, and you have your hands in the water mudra, then whenever your attention goes to your hands, it will remind you of water. And it will remind you, oh, I'm doing the water mudra because I'm practicing the meditation on the water element. So for you, doing the water mudra might be helpful because it would remind you of what you're doing. For me, it would probably not be helpful because it would just be a hand position that doesn't mean anything to me. So coming again to the idea of doing whatever works. So for you, sure, give it a shot. Try out putting your hands in the water mudra and see if that works as a gentle reminder to keep you on the right track.
Great. And Suzanne is saying, I love how this practice makes us challenge our ideas about ourselves or our not selves, not just who, but what we are. It is much kinder to think of myself as a walking waterfall than other ideas I have had. This is so cute. Walking waterfall is actually a really beautiful
Yeah, that's
image.
lovely. Yeah.
Oh, so cute. Okay. And whoops. Reed says, just an observation. It seems like the available material that is liquid is much less than that which is hardness. It makes the observation seem like a more precise one than with the earth element.
Well, I would say that the water element is a bit more subtle. And I think that's mainly just because we're used to paying more attention to the earthy side of our experience. We're used to relating to things in terms of solid matter, much more so than in terms of liquid. And advanced warning, this is going to become more obvious as we progress through the other elements. So the earth element is the easy one for most people. The next few, not so much. Advanced warning. So the truth is that the water element is just as pervasive as the earth element. The difference is that we're not as used to paying attention to it, which makes it more difficult to hold the mind on it. But the whole body is water element. The whole body is saturated with water element. It's all right here. We're just not used to relating to it in that way. So it takes a little while. So one of the big challenges I've noticed that many people have with the 6 elements meditation is just that they have no familiarity with this kind of practice. The earth element, they're kind of vaguely familiar with because it's similar to mindfulness of the body. And some people, the air element is not too far away because it reminds them of mindfulness of breathing. But everything else, it's new territory. It's unfamiliar territory. So in the beginning, it's going to be a little bit challenging. But you stick with it and it gets easier. Like any skill, the more you do it, the easier it gets. Okay?
Thanks, Bhante. And Gleam Tech, whose real name I do not remember right now.
We can go with Gleam Tech. That's a good name.
Says, do elements co-arise? While walking across wood and stone floor surfaces during walking meditation, temperature changes were noticeable while noticing the earth element at the soles of the feet.
So I usually recommend picking one element at a time. The practice of observing multiple elements at the same time, I'll probably talk about tomorrow because that's a more advanced practice that it depends upon already having good familiarity with each of the elements individually, or else our attention tends to get muddled. It tends to get kind of blurry and unclear. So for now, I recommend having your primary attention be on one element and not get too caught up in trying to be aware of multiple elements at the same time. Okay.
Marielle is saying, is feeling the blood running throughout your body part of feeling the water element?
Yeah. Yes.
Sadhu. Great. Kat says, feeling very fatigued today, but happy to be here. Enjoyed the water element inside outside joining meditation. My body really wants to rest though. Any advice for next meditation period?
Yeah, go take a nap. Nap for a period of time, then drink a cup of tea, and then get back to your meditation. That's what I recommend. When you're really tired and it's a struggle every second just to stay awake, that's really not the best conditions for meditation practice. You can try, and sometimes you find a wellspring of energy within yourself that you didn't realize you had. And sometimes you can make something out of the meditation period. But usually if we're really exhausted, then we're just wasting our time. So you need to be honest with yourself about whether it's the kind of like mild tiredness that you can push through, or whether it's that kind of zombie-like fatigue, which you actually just need to take a little nap and have some tea.
Right. And Lunu asks, what is meditation?
Briefly speaking, from a Buddhist standpoint, meditation is training the mind to be peaceful and wise. It's training the mind to cultivate wisdom and compassion. It's training the mind to see things as they are and to respond appropriately and gently to that seeing. That's what meditation is. It's training the mind to be compassionate and wise.
And Sally is asking, in sitting, I started with the hardness, softness quality from my head through span, legs, cushion, floor, building, earth, universe, and then it's hard to stay with the earth elements of the universe because wandering thoughts always come.
When that happens, come back to what's close to you. So when I do earth element, actually when I do any of the elements, I'm usually more aware of the body and the immediate room that I'm in, because that's the most powerful and directly tangible experience of the element. And actually that's enough to give you a pretty strong feeling of not self. So beyond this room, our sensory awareness is much weaker. So it does tend to be more of a conceptual thing. So it's still good to have that conceptual awareness. But if we're trying to do this meditation as a conceptual practice, it won't be very effective. So having the concept in our mind, the concept that the entire universe is all made up of the same elements is great, but our actual felt experience doesn't extend very far. Our actual felt experience drops off sharply in intensity beyond a few meters. So most of your practice, then I recommend focusing on your body and the room that you're in. If you're outdoors, it gets a little more interesting because you have more space. And actually, the elements meditation is a great one for outdoors meditation because it also helps to give you a sense of the extent and scope of the natural elements. But it also works perfectly fine indoors. It just means that the scope of your awareness is a little more limited. But that's okay. You just do what you can with what you have. So yeah, when you find that it's getting too abstract and you're losing touch with the felt experience, come back to your body and the room that it's in, and just work on that. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. And Trisha says, I've always been in tune with my body due to growing up with digestive issues. When I focus on my blood flowing, sometimes anxiety can arise and lightheadedness. I'm not usually squeamish. Should I not focus on the blood, or is there another way to go about this that won't make me feel this anxiety?
See if there's another way you can get in touch with the water element besides the blood. So use other aspects of your body that are wet and moist and liquid. There's no shortage of options because, as I mentioned earlier, your whole body is wet. So there's no shortage of options for cultivating the water element meditation. But at some point, you do need to address that squeamishness to being aware of your own blood. At some point, you do need to start gently letting your awareness recognize the blood flowing in your veins with serenity, accepting it's just like this and that's okay. But maybe that's not today. Maybe it's not tomorrow. Maybe it's not next year. Who knows? But at some point, you do need to start developing that ability to be peacefully aware of your own blood because it's right here and it's not going anywhere. And if it does go somewhere, that's a big problem and you should see a doctor very quickly. So you need to learn to be peacefully aware of your own blood. But if you feel like you're just not ready for that yet, then just don't do it. Do other practices of developing awareness of the water element in other ways. Okay.
Thank you. And Sally says, should I start over the scanning? What shall we do with wandering thoughts, especially in daily life? How to focus and use this method?
Just keep coming back to the feeling of the element in your body. So if it's the earth element, just keep coming back to the feeling of the body as a solid object and the experience of solid objects as you interact with the world. If you're doing the water element, keep coming back to the feeling of moisture in the body and the experience of moisture as you interact with the world. So it's just like that. It's just focusing on the experience of the element as you go throughout your day.
There's lots of words of appreciation. And Bobby asks, can this method lead to jhana?
Depends on how you use it. The way I'm describing it, probably not, because I'm describing it as a anatta method. So the focus here is not really on stabilizing the mind in jhana, but rather on seeing the body as not self. So the purpose here is not getting into jhana. You might accidentally wander into jhana using this method. It's possible. If your mind becomes very peaceful and steady and stable, then you can enter jhana just as a natural effect of the mind being steady and peaceful and stable. But that's not really its purpose. It's not the quickest way to get jhana. On the other hand, if you pick one of the elements, and the earth element works the best for this, if you pick one of the elements and just focus all your attention just on feeling the element without including the not self aspect, but just focusing on holding the mind steady in awareness of the earth element, then yeah, that will bring you into jhana. Similarly to doing mindfulness of the body. If you hold the mind still on anything, then it can enter jhana.
Julia says, to me, it feels like each element requires at least 3 hours of sitting. Well, actually, they do this retreat in a month and a half. So I went to personally a week-long retreat of this, and Bhante is really kind to be offering the really condensed teaching.
Yeah, Yulia, I agree. So I like to offer the 6 elements in the course of at least a week-long retreat, because then I can give a full day to each element. And as Ayasoma was saying, even that is a hyper condensed form. So doing it 1 week per element is much more effective, because then you get really, really familiar with each element before moving on to the next one. But in the course of 2 days, I just don't have time for that, and neither do you. So we're doing things a little bit quicker.
This being said, you can explore for longer periods of time on your own.
Yes. So since right now, most of the world is on retreat, then you can use this opportunity to do your personal meditation retreat. So if you want to spend 3 hours per element, you've got the opportunity.
And Mehmet says, do you think it is more useful to enter and stay in the jhana, or emerging from jhana, or not involving in jhana at all during this meditation?
So the way I'm teaching this meditation is not really related at all to jhana practice, except to the extent that jhana might happen on its own. As you become aware of the feeling of one of the elements, if your mind becomes fully stabilized in that awareness, then you might enter jhana on that account. But as I was talking about, I think it was yesterday with the Anupada Sutta, was that yesterday?
Yes.
Yeah. While in jhana, you can still practice insight meditation. And this is clearly stated in many, many suttas. So even if you do happen to wander into jhana while doing the preparation stage, the stage of developing familiarity with one of the elements, then that doesn't stop you from seeing the element as not self. In fact, that should help you, because your mind will be fully stable. But the way I'm teaching this is not to get deep into samadhi before cultivating the perception of not self, but rather just to spend a little bit of time feeling the element, so that your mind is fully aware of the element. And then from that full awareness, going directly into doing Vipassana practice, going directly into doing the anatta sanya. And this is a bit different from how I normally teach practice. I normally teach to start by developing strong samadhi, then to practice Vipassana. But with the 6 elements, I find that you can go directly into Vipassana fairly quickly. You don't need to spend a whole lot of time on the preparation stage. You can get into anatta sanya fairly quickly. That's one of the really special aspects of the 6 elements meditation, is that it's a Vipassana method which doesn't rely upon first developing strong samadhi. And it's one of the most direct and quick ways to get into an effective experience of anatta sanya. Okay? Ayasoma is very happy about this.
Yes, it's one of my favorite meditations, and I love Vipassana practice. Reed says, you aren't the only one feeling, to Yulia, he's talking about, like they're only barely scratching the surface of this technique, if that's what you mean. Kevin, on the other hand, says, it was raining here in Brooklyn during this guided meditation, very serendipitous. Bhante saying, not me, not mine, just an aspect of nature, was very helpful while hearing the rainfall. I agree. Yeah, it was great. And Sally asks, shall we always come back with the most obvious part? For example, when I am cutting food, I'm aware of the earth element of hand rather than the whole body.
There's two ways of doing that practice. Like if you're incorporating the elements into daily life, one is to pick one element and always stay focused on that element. And that's more the approach that I recommend because that helps to restrain the mind. It helps to keep the mind from jumping around based on its desires and tendencies. The other approach is whatever you're feeling, focus on the element which is most obvious in that experience. So, for example, when you're touching a carrot, the most obvious thing might be the earth element because it's hard and solid. But if you just washed the carrot in the sink, then the most obvious thing might be the wetness that you're touching on the carrot. If the carrot, if you just washed it in hot water, then the most obvious thing might be that the carrot is hot. So it might be the fire element, the heat element. You're not likely to experience the air element in holding a carrot, but you might drop the carrot and then notice the air element where you're not holding the carrot. So these are ways that you can notice the dominant element in any moment of experience. The main problem that I have with that approach is that it leads to the mind bouncing around a lot. So that can destabilize the mind. I find it much more effective in my own experience, and admittedly, this is just my own experience. Your experience may be different from mine, but in my own experience, it's much more effective to choose an element and to keep bringing the mind back to that chosen element instead of bouncing around. And this is also important because our experience in every moment is some mixture of the elements. So the carrot doesn't only feel hard, it feels hard and it feels wet and it feels warm all at once. So this can lead to this kind of indecisiveness of like, well, but is the wetness more prominent than the hardness? I'm not sure. What should I focus on? And that's not so useful. But if you've just already decided, I am doing the water element, then no matter what experience you have, you will be noticing the water element in that experience. So that's how I recommend practicing. Pick an element and stick with it.
Thank you, Bhante. Well, Reed and Kevin are making some fun jokes. I'll read them quickly.
Okay.
Reed says, haha, it's humid and rainy here too, very timely. Hopefully a tornado won't form or volcano erupt during the later practices though. And Kevin says, well, there wasn't an earthquake during the Earth one, so we're probably okay. And Drew, hello, Drew. Good to see you online as well. He's asking, is a sense of body weight / gravity / heaviness considered the earth element?
Yes. Yeah, that's how I relate to it. I relate to heaviness as an aspect of earth element. Okay, any other questions?
Well, that was the last one.
Okay, so let's do a short fire element meditation because I want you to have some more options. And then this evening, we'll focus on whatever seems appropriate to focus on. But for now, I'll give you another option to play with. So come back into your meditation posture. So sitting up nice and tall. Take a few deep breaths. Letting the body and mind settle and relax. Bringing attention into your body and focusing on the feeling of heat, the feeling of warmth all through the body. So the feeling of warmth tends to be especially strong in the torso, the area between the neck and the waist. Feel the heat element very strongly. And from there, radiating out through the whole body. As if there was a blazing star in the center of your torso, radiating heat through the whole body, like a blazing ball of fire, radiating warmth in all directions. Just focusing on feeling heat, warmth. Feeling the heat radiating all through the body, radiating out into the world around it. You can also feel the warmth in the room around you, soaking into your body. The warmth of your clothing against your skin, the warmth of the cushion beneath you. So the warmth inside the body and the warmth outside the body. It's all just the same heat element. It's all just the same fire element, inside and outside. So the heat in the body is the same as the heat in your radiators, same as the heat that comes from the core of the earth, the heat that comes from the sun and the stars. So it's all the same heat. So the whole universe is just one vast field of heat energy, one vast field of warmth, warmer in some places, less warm in others. And the heat energy just keeps flowing and shifting and circulating. So, right here in this room, in this place, heat is flowing out of the body and into the body. So, it's all just one vast field of heat with no boundary between inside and out, no boundary between me and not me, no boundary between body and outside world. It's just heat element. So just letting the perception of an edge to the body dissipate into awareness of the field of heat energy, awareness of the fire element. And in the fire element, there's no inside, there's no outside. It's all just fire element. Not me, not mine, just nature. Warmth, heat, radiating. Not me, not mine, just nature. Feeling the fire element saturating and pervading experience. Feeling the fire element all throughout the room and beyond. It's all just one vast field of heat energy. Not me, not mine, just nature. So you can relax your body. If you have any questions before we end for uh, the afternoon, please feel free to type in your questions. So, what I would recommend for the rest of the afternoon, which is a little over 2 hours, the recommendation is to practice from when we finish here until 5 o'clock. So, right now, that'll be about 2 hours and 20 minutes, unless there's some questions. So I recommend doing a period of sitting, a period of walking, a period of walking, then sitting, then walking, then sitting, and spend some time with the water element and some time with the fire element. So digging a bit deeper into both of these elements. So it's actually perfect. So one period of walking and sitting for the water element, one period of walking and sitting for the fire element. That then you have more time to go a bit deeper into these practices and really see how it affects your mind and really see how you relate to these elements. And you'll also get a sense now that you have three elements to work with: earth, water, and fire. You'll start to get a sense as to which one is easiest for you, which one you feel the most connection with, which one helps you get into the perception of not self the most easily. So, do we have any questions?
There were some comments anyway. So
Okay.
Kat says, I honestly felt like I transformed into a flame of fire. That was pretty cool. Thanks, I am Bhante, for this day. And Reed says, you're right, more subtle than the one before. It is more challenging, not just to discern the fire element in the first place, but to keep the mind from wandering.
Hmm.
For me, at least, of course. And Marial says, the fire element is the strongest I felt, but at a moment I started to feel weird. So I concentrated on my breath, which I think suited the experience.
Depends on what you mean by weird. So, feeling weird is pretty normal in Buddhist meditation because we're doing things that we're not used to doing. And therefore, it feels weird. So, weird is not necessarily bad. Weird just means unfamiliar. And in fact, we want to feel weird during Buddhist meditation because our normal is delusion. Therefore, wisdom is going to feel weird at first because it's not something we're used to. So, feeling weird is not necessarily a problem, depending on the kind of weird. So, if you speak a bit more about what you mean by weird, I can address as to whether or not switching to breathing is a good plan or not. Anything else?
Yes, Jerry says, not me, not mine, just nature,
Mm,
are some very strong words. This meditation resonated with me a lot.
great.
Felt a lot of energy flowing through me. Through me. And Kevin asks, a bit off slash on topic. I've heard stories on monks able to sit for hours in the snow in just their robes. Does this have anything to do with this practice?
So that most commonly you hear about that in Tibetan Buddhism, where they have a practice called Tummo, and I don't know Tibetan, so I'm probably mispronouncing this word, but it's usually spelled Tummo, which is called the meditation on inner heat, which mm, allows your body to produce a tremendous amount of heat such that people can sit outside in freezing cold weather and not freeze. So the meditation on the fire element can be used in a similar way. When you get proficient with it, you can use this to keep your body warm when it's cold, but that's not its purpose. So the purpose of this meditation is to recognize the truth of not self in a very direct way. Its purpose is not to play with fire, though as you become more proficient, you do start to get a certain amount of control over your body heat. But that's more of a side effect. And it doesn't happen for everyone, but many people do have that experience. So that might be your experience, and it might not be. Either way, it's beside the point, because we're not trying to master our body heat. We're trying to see our body heat as being not self. Okay?
And Drew and Melinda are reconnecting online. That's
Yay.
because they both came here for the 28th Jhana retreat in January. So they're meeting right now. And Julia, I think, asked pretty much the same question of Kevin. So I think that's been answered already. And Drew says, should we understand the feeling of cold as the fire element in deprivation in conjunction of feelings of warmth, all the same?
Yeah, that's usually how it's described. So the feeling of coldness is just when the fire element is very weak, whereas the feeling of heat is when the fire element is very strong. But it's still relating to the fire element. It's just a matter of whether there's very little fire element or a lot of fire element. Yeah, but it's the experience of warmth.
And Peter asks, for anyone like me with poor extremity circulation, is it okay to notice both heat and cold body parts?
So I do recommend focusing on the feeling of heat. So for this meditation practice, it's actually better if your body is a little on the warm side. So maybe put on an extra sweatshirt or use a blanket or turn up the heat a little bit in your room or all of the above. Something that makes it a little bit easier to feel heat tends to be more effective. So if you're really cold, you can still do the meditation on the fire element, but it's more difficult, especially if you're not already proficient. So it's better if your body feels a bit more on the warm side. So if you have cold extremities, well, then you might do something about it. Wear heavy socks while you meditate. Wrap your hands in a blanket while you meditate. Make sure that your body feels warm. That helps quite a bit.
And Sally asks, fire element, when I put mind on chest, I can feel the warm temperature, energy in chest. Then moving down to abdomen and through the span back, can I observe the heating energy moves in the body?
Well, see what it feels like. Some people perceive the heat element as pulsing or flowing. For me, it usually feels fairly still. For me, the experience of the fire element is usually fairly still. It's more like a gentle throbbing rather than a movement. Uh, but your experience may be different. What I would encourage, though, I do encourage holding the mind still. So, not intentionally moving your mind through the body. So, if you like the torso, then just stay with the torso. If you like the chest, just stay with the chest. If you like the abdomen, just stay with the abdomen, but not moving your mind around a lot. Because when you move your mind around a lot, then you tend to lose focus. So it's usually better to keep the mind more still. So even though the practice I'm teaching is not necessarily a deep samadhi method, like every other Vipassana method, it is supported by samadhi. And samadhi is supported by stillness of attention. So I recommend not moving your mind a lot, or actually at all if you can help it.
She also says, I cannot feel the warm heating outside of my body. I can feel cold on skin.
Well, maybe turn up the heat in your room a little bit. But actually, you can still feel it outside your body. It's just, as mentioned before, the experience of cold is still the experience of the fire element. It's just experiencing a low intensity of fire element.
And Melvin, interestingly enough, had the AC on, which made, he says, which made my body heat more pronounced, but when moving out from my body, it made that problematic. It's interesting that you're using the AC now. I am so cold. You're clearly very American, and I'm clearly very Italian.
Okay, next question.
That's it, actually, for now.
Okay. All right, so we have 2 hours and 10 minutes left. So once again, I recommend doing walking and then sitting for the water element, and then walking and sitting for the fire element. And then you can take a break from 5 to 6. Or you can keep meditating if you want to, that's fine too. But break from 5 to 6, and then at 6 o'clock, we'll come back together for the Ratana Sutta chanting. Okay?
Oh, and actually, I'm sorry, there are just 2 last questions. Mehmet is asking, is it discouraged to focus also on the colors appearing connected with the temperature, like red with warmth and blue with cold?
I don't recommend it because then you're going to get caught up in perception of color, which is kind of beside the point. We're more interested in the feeling of heat. If you get caught up in the colors, that might pull you away from that focusing on heat. So I don't really recommend it.
So Peter says, not moving the mind for heat meditation. Does that apply to liquid also, one body part / session?
Actually, I recommend feeling your whole body. With all of these elements, feel your whole body all at once. That seems to be what's most effective for me anyway, is to feel the entire body all at once. That seems to be much more effective rather than focusing just on one part of the body. But once again, your mileage may vary, so feel free to experiment with different ways of practicing with the elements and see what happens. But yeah, my official recommendation is feel the whole body all at once while keeping the mind still. That's what I recommend. Okay. Anything else?
I think that's it for now.
Okay.
Sally had the same question, Peter, so I think it's been answered. All right, so thank you so much, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And have a great practice this afternoon. And as Bhante mentioned, we'll be meeting at 6 p.m. Again for the Ratana Sutta chanting and for any last questions you might have then. And then we'll meet again after that at 7:30 p.m. for our final session of the day. And Kevin says, only 3 more subscribers to reach 1,000. Yes, so remember to subscribe to the channel. We're almost there. And yeah, great. Thank you. See you later. Have a great.